So Bernie Sanders dropped another awesome policy at one of his rallies last week. This made quite a bit of news, and I don't think that the way it was covered reflected the way people feel about it. So let's take a look, and then we'll talk about it.
In another piece of legislation that we're going to be offering, we will eliminate medical debt in this country. I mean, I just stop and think for a second, why should people be placed in financial duress? For what crime did you commit? You had a serious illness? All right. That is not what this country should be about.
Eliminating all medical debt. Damn. So it was last week. I think that it was the Washington Post back and forth that led Bernie to make this decision and run with this policy. But there was a study that came out recently which found that over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt as a result of medical bills. And the Washington Post cited that story, and then when Bernie made that same claim, the Washington Post did a fact check where they said, Bernie Sanders, 3 Pinocchios out of 4. Come on, Bernie, 500,000 medical bankruptcies? Well, actually, the way it works is those people also had some other bills, and even though medical bills was the main cause, that was the majority of their debt, you can't say that it's medical bankruptcies because there were other factors that played into it, stupid Bernie. So everybody and their mother in the entire country opened up the bowels of hell on the Washington Post and said, this is the most tedious, ridiculous, work backwards from your conclusion, nonsense, nitpicking, nuanced trolling garbage. And, to the point where Bernie Sanders and his campaign released a statement asking the Washington Post for an apology and a retraction. And they are correct to do that because they are factually correct. And in fact, the real number is over 500,000, about 530,000 Americans end up going bankrupt because of medical bills. And by the way, the Washington Post spoke to the author of that study, and the author was like, yeah, Bernie's correct, and Washington Post is wrong. But they still went with 3 out of 4 Pinocchios. So I think it was that which then led Bernie and his team to say, number one, come on. Number two, okay, you want to play this game? Here we go. And they came out with this brilliant policy, which it actually bugs me that it never occurred to me before, because we have the conversation about free college, and then linked with free college is this idea of eliminating student loan debt, which is a wonderful idea. But when we have the conversation about Medicare for all, moving to Medicare for all, it never occurred to me, and we never also spoke about, well, what about the people with outstanding medical debt, which could very well lead to their bankruptcy? And now Bernie Sanders stepping up and saying, yeah, we're going to eliminate all of that. This isn't the milquetoast nonsense of Kamala Harris of like, oh, if you have student loans, we'll help you eliminate a certain portion of it if you open up a small business in an area where there's an excess number of feral cats and blah, 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 blah. She came out with this incredibly specific, ridiculous proposal on student loan debt. And of course, you got Elizabeth Warren, who inches a little further in a better direction where I forget what the exact percentage is, but she eliminates some percentage of student loan debt that's more than Kamala. And then Bernie steps up and is like, yeah, we're going to get rid of all of it. We're going to get rid of all of it. And now on medical debt, the same thing. So, of course, the reaction was what you'd expect the reaction to be from the lazy establishment hacks. And what I call this is a status quo bias. And what they do is they get like outraged and almost offended at the idea that we can make any big structural change. And so they act like it's not possible to do these big structural things, even though it is possible. And they don't provide any argument. They have nothing but scorn for the stuff that Bernie Sanders is trying to do. Jennifer Rubin was one of them who responded to a story. The Hill tweeted out this story of Bernie wanting to eliminate medical debt. And she responds, she's like, might want to talk to some bankruptcy lawyers. Why? Why? And just so everybody knows, if you're thinking like, wow, come on, how can we afford that? It costs $81 billion to eliminate all medical debt in this country. You know what the 1 year military spending increase was in 2017? $80 billion. So for the amount of money we spent adding on top of our already bloated military budget in 1 year is the amount of money it would cost to get rid of all medical debt. You didn't see or hear a single argument or a single pundit say when they just added $80 billion in 1 year to the war budget, because that's what it is. You didn't hear anybody say, well, yeah, let's be serious. How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for that? How are we going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for that? You didn't hear it. Why? Because some things they just take off the table and they grandfather it in as like, well, this is the serious stuff that we need to spend on, and I don't want to hear any, silly claptrap about how, oh, hey, maybe we can't afford this stuff. All serious people agree that these things are off the table, and we obviously have to do it because of, I don't know, national security or whatever. So think about that. We actually did not need $80 billion more on the military budget. If anything, we needed and sorry for the beeping in the background, this battery's fucking shot. If anything, we needed a giant reduction in the military budget. But still, nobody said, hey, even if we kept the spending the same, it'd be too much. Never mind adding $80 billion. So it's just this assumption, this default assumption of this is serious people in Washington, D.C. doing serious things, and that's why we have to spend a tremendous amount of money on the military and continue to be the world's empire and superpower. But when it comes to something as serious as eliminating medical debt for our fellow citizens, when over 500,000 of them will go bankrupt as a result of those medical bills, all of a sudden, you have people coming out saying it's not possible. Of course it's fucking possible. It's absolutely possible. In fact, not only is it possible, it's incredibly simple as well. It doesn't require any, new giant bureaucracy or anything of that nature. It's a debt jubilee. There's historical precedent for this in a variety of places. And again, it's not even that much money, relatively speaking. We spent $7 trillion when all is said and done in Iraq. $7 trillion, and we have nothing to show for it. Another $2 trillion in Afghanistan. And guess what? Today, the Taliban controls more of the country than they did when we originally invaded. We wasted trillions of dollars on the war on drugs with the stated goal of limiting or eliminating the number of people taking drugs, and the number is the same, if not more, than it was when we started it. And now we got hundreds of thousands of dead bodies on our hands as well. So we have all the money in the world for these incredibly dumb, backwards priorities, which empirically did not work. But when you talk about doing something as simple and straightforward and moral as eliminating student loan debt, all of a sudden, that's not possible, and we shouldn't discuss it, and it's silly left-wing nonsense. And by the way, if you agree with the logic of Medicare for All, which 70% of the country does, you're also agreeing to the logic of eliminating the debt associated with medical bills that predates it. Because what you're saying is, hey, it is immoral to have a for-profit system when it comes to healthcare. That beeping is going to drive me fucking crazy. We'll address that when this story's over, when this segment's over. But if you are agreeing to the logic of Medicare for All, you're also, perhaps without even realizing it, but you're also agreeing that medical debt is incredibly immoral and unethical. And for the record, every other developed country, medical debt is not a thing. It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. It's not an option. You put those two words together, they'll look at you like you're crazy. Like, what do you mean? You know how it works here? Sick, help. End of conversation. Sick, help. That's it. You're going to potentially go bankrupt because of medical bills? Is that what you're going to do? You're going to go bankrupt because of medical bills. Because you got sick, you got hurt, you got some sort of disease, and so now, sorry, but we're going to have to declare bankruptcy, and we can't even afford the mortgage on our house anymore. We can't afford to pay the light bill. We're in financial ruin as a result of getting sick. Think about how insane that is. And people are going to nuance troll and act like, is this even possible? I don't even think this is possible. I've seen segments on YouTube of a bunch of idiots who are like, oh, here we go again. Bernie, see, now he wants to eliminate medical debt. Well, he keeps adding things to the list. Does he? He keeps adding things to the list. But this is Like I said, if you agree to Medicare for all, which every other developed country has one version or another of a single-payer system, you're agreeing to the logic of eliminating medical debt. Bernie didn't come out and say, hey, I'm going to declare that everybody gets a free Xbox. I'm going to declare that, whatever, we have a universal program to give everybody a free lifetime pass to the movie theater. No, it turns out when he's talking about consumer goods, he hasn't said, let's have the government fund it. Let's, have a totally socialist economy. No, he's saying the basic necessities of life are things that should be off the table in a civilized society and perhaps funded with our tax money. And he's correct about that. He's correct. We have cops. We have the fire department. We fund our infrastructure. So what Bernie's saying is, let's add a few more basic things to that list. Just standard social democratic stuff here. All we're talking about is healthcare. All we're talking about is education. We're talking about things that the overwhelming majority of the American people agree with and believe in. And he's going to be treated like a buffoon for mentioning this. Well, you know what? Talk to somebody who has medical debt and who's on the brink of bankruptcy and ask them what they think about this. Because my guess is regular people have a very different take than the talking heads in the media and then the smug-ass pundits who act like, this is even possible? I don't even think this is possible. I'm even having this conversation. Spending money to actually help the citizens of a country? No. My God. How could you? He's a serious person proposing serious policies, and all the people who are acting like he's not serious, ironically, are not serious. They're the buffoons. They have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea what this entails. To act like this is some sort of Looney Tunes idea. I mean, seriously? So you are going to proudly stand on the side of I'm pro-medical debt. That's the side you're going to be on? And you think you're going to win that debate? I dare Donald Trump in the general election to try to take Bernie on this issue. I dare you, Donnie. I dare you. I dare you. And that's the other part that's so brilliant about Bernie Sanders, is that he plants a flag and then he forces people who disagree to make the argument. Okay, so you're against him on this. Now the burden is on you to go ahead and make an argument as to why he's wrong and why medical debt is a good and necessary part of our economy. Floor's yours, by all means. I'll wait. And what you do is you actually expose people when you do this. You expose people. And my guess is what goes on in these people's minds when they initially react like, how could we change such a thing? Like, in the heat of the moment, they don't realize that they sound as ridiculous as they sound. And then in retrospect, people will look back, 30 years from now, you look back at those guys and say, whoa, really? They made an argument against eliminating medical debt. Why? And the answer is, it's the status quo bias. Don't get me wrong, some people are just flat out corrupt and, they're funded by the industries that would be hurt by this. So some of it is just rank corruption. But everybody who's not getting a check cut to them, these are people who just think, well, what do you mean? It works like this right now, so how can we change it? It's a status quo bias. I don't know. I'm comfortable with the status quo. This is the way it is, so why change it? And usually with those people, they don't have any personal experience with something affecting them. So I love this proposal. I'm kind of annoyed that it never occurred to me beforehand. But now Bernie brought it up. This may have been spurred on by the Washington Post picking a fight that they shouldn't have picked. And remember when everybody was arguing, like CNN and all these smug mainstream media outlets were acting like, Bernie's like Trump for saying that the media is biased against him. Well, what do you call this? Fact check, which everybody agrees is the most ridiculous fact check in human history. Add this right on top of the 16 negative stories in 16 hours that the Washington Post did in 2016. So the idea that, are you kidding me? There's massive anti-Bernie Sanders media bias. And why? Because he's an agent of actual change. And those people are very comfortable with the status quo. And I've never seen a better example of it than this right here, where he proposes a very common sense, basic idea, which doesn't even cost that much, of eliminating medical debt. And all the clowns in mainstream media, all the goofballs come out of the woodworks to treat it with scorn without providing a single argument. Not a single argument against it. It's just scorn, looking down on it, scoffing at it, acting like, he wants to change stuff. He wants to change things. Yeah? That's good. That's a positive thing. But I'm not going to go bankrupt for medical bills, so what does it matter? Right. Well, that's your issue, that you're unable to step outside your own narrow worldview and see the world from somebody else's perspective who maybe is impacted by this system in a negative way. So Bernie's on a roll, and I hope he keeps them coming, and I hope he takes on all the trolls and all the haters and all the detractors who want to argue against basic things that make perfect sense. Bring it on.